Okay, we will go ahead and get started. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you may be in the world, and welcome to this Balkan History Association webinar. Today's presentation will be by Dr. Francesco Trupia, titled "Echoes of War and the Balkans Between Ukraine and Palestine." In a moment, Dr. Trupia will give us his presentation, but I just wanted to let you know that this webinar will explore the history and memories of Muslims in and from the Balkans amid the geopolitical upheavals in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Looking at the Yugoslav wars and their afterlives, the webinar focuses precisely on how the echoes of war from Ukraine and Gaza reopen unhealed wounds and perpetuate traumatic scars among Muslims. After Dr. Trupia does his presentation, we will have some time for questions and answer sessions. So if you think of things during his presentation, maybe jot a note down or make a mental note, and there'll be time for questions when the presentation's over. So allow me to introduce Dr. Trupia. Francesco Trupia is a postdoctoral researcher at the Nicolaus Copernicus University in Torun, Poland, and a research fellow at the CEU Democracy Institute in Budapest, Hungary. His research focuses on the intersections of democracy, memory, and political participation of minority groups in Southeast and Eastern Europe. And he has recently authored Islamophobia in European Cities, Solidarity's Responses and Dilemmas for Young Balkan Muslims, published from Routledge, and his new pivot book, The Balkans and Palestine, Old Frictions, New Convergences, will be out this coming September for Palgrave Macmillan. So let me go ahead and give the floor to Dr. Trupia. It's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Timothy, and good afternoon, everyone. I just sent you the request for sharing my screen. I have a PowerPoint presentation, and you just need to let me know whether you are able to see my presentation on the screen. Can you just raise your hand or say something? So I'm sure that you are going to follow. Okay. All right. So once again, thank you so much, Timothy, for the kind introduction and also presenting very briefly my presentation, like today's talk. So I'm not going to repeat myself. The idea of this seminar is basically to use the historical background and the historical predicament of the Muslims in the Balkans in order to explore how they have reacted to the echoes of war in Ukraine and in the Middle East, particularly in Gaza right now, and to explain why there has been, as you can see from the photos, which is a demonstration taking place in Sarajevo, which has been the epicenter of solidarity campaigns for Palestinians, but after October 7th, 2023, but also a region, the Balkans, where the post-colonial and the post-socialist legacies have kind of converged over the last couple of years, especially after the Russians' aggression of Ukraine in February 2022. Without wasting so much time, I'm going to start addressing the question that I would like to answer throughout this presentation. So first of all, not going in a chronological order, but starting with the latest crisis and the ongoing genocidal violence in Gaza, why most Muslims in and from the Balkans have stood up for Palestinians. If we look at the media landscape and also different scholars, of course, the first impression is the Islam as a religious factor. So the Muslims in the Balkans and most Palestinians are Muslims. So because of religion, they stay close to one another. They are part of the Ummah, the so-called global Muslim community. Therefore, solidarity campaigns are very easy to be organized. And of course, when it comes to, for instance, Muslims in Bosnia, as you can see from this photo that I've taken from a social media I think from from Instagram, you have a clear use of memory and history between the war in Bosnia in 1992-1995 and today's Palestinians, with a very necropolitical image that uses to compare the two situations, and also supporting in a coherent way, let's say, the solidarity campaigns and why Muslims in Bosnia, after all, have reacted to Israel's retaliation and war in Gaza. The second factor could be also the socialist legacies, right? As you can see from this map, you see the all former communist countries in Central and Eastern Europe recognizing the state of Palestine. So in a typical rhetoric that have been listening to over the last couple of months, you know, a typical aggression against Palestine and Gaza in particular has brought many Muslims in the Balkans to contest and to enact postulates of solidarities for the Muslims and for Palestinians based on the legacies of the past and the recognition of the Palestinian state, which, as you can see, has been recognized by Ireland, Spain, in the West quite recently, actually. The third one is about the fact that these solidarity campaigns, or the motivation for which Muslims in the Balkans have reacted to the situation in Gaza, is concerning, and perhaps is also connected with the use of history, and in particular of the weaponization of history. This is actually a tabloid, a Serbian tabloid, where we can read on the front page that actually Hamas has been buying weapons from UCK, so the Kosovo Liberation Army. And this use of history has been extremely problematic, not only in the field, in domain of history, but also for the ethos of war that has been circulating across the Balkans, and how this kind of weaponization of history speaks to the memories of Muslims in the Balkans, reactivating certain traumas that are still not completely recovered when it comes to reconciliation, or to look at history in a more critical way that doesn't create more problems than solving the issues that are still at stake in the Balkans. When it comes to the other questions of why and how Muslims in the Balkans have reacted to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, in general, we have two kind of discourses. First of all is the return of empires, right? The Russians' aggression against Ukraine, and also Moscow's rhetoric against Ukrainians and Ukraine, and the contestation of the Ukrainian statehood, for sure harks us back to understanding how the empire is back, and also other kind of empires. Here you can see a billboard from Serbia, where it's written Zajedno, so which means like united or unity, with the Serbian and Russian flag. And this kind of rhetoric and this kind of geopolitical unity, based on some ideas of Serbian-Russian brotherhood and so on and so forth, have been kind of intimidating for many Muslims in the Balkans, because we know that the dissolution of Yugoslavia was happening among many issues, also with this kind of return of the Serbian Empire, or trying of restoration of the Serbian Empire after the Yugoslavian experiences, let's say. Or also another reason for which many Muslims in the Balkans, and not in this case only Muslims, but Balkan people in general, especially in former Yugoslavian countries, have feared the war, and they have been very sensitive to the echoes of war from Ukraine. It's because of the spillover effects. I remember in 2022 when Russia started to the full-scale invasion against Ukraine, and I was doing research among the Balkan diaspora. Many people told me that their families were ready to pack their things and to leave the Balkans, because they were sure that the war was going to spread and to be again an issue across the Balkans, namely in Western Balkans, and particularly in Bosnia and in Kosovo as well, exactly for these ties between the Serbian and the Russian ways of dealing with war and the past, and the weaponization of history. In my presentation, as Mr. French really very kindly mentioned, I'm going to give you another perspective of the echoes of war among the Muslims in the Balkans by mentioning like the two publications that I've been working on, and I want to focus more not only on the issues that I've been presenting so far, but also on slightly different perspectives that, in my opinion, have been overlooked, but they are very telling to explain why Muslims and the Balkans as a region have reacted in the way they have done so far when it comes to the war in Ukraine and the Middle East, in particular in Gaza. So I'm going to focus more on the liberal intervention outcomes, especially in the former Yugoslavian context. Also, the burden of Euro-Atlantic alliance and what it means for the Balkans and for the Muslim population when you are in between the arc of crisis with Eastern Europe and Ukraine, and from the southern part, the war emerging from the Middle East and right now. And then I'm going also to talk more about the counter-hegemonic histories. So some good, or let's say positive stories that have been also coming out from this time of crisis directly from the Balkans. So I'm not going to say again what I have already said, but these three perspectives I have for sure investigated them in the way that I wanted to make sure to provide alternatives to reading the today's context in the Balkans when it comes to the reaction of the region. And in this case, we are talking about the Muslim minority or the Muslim population in the Southeast Europe, in the Balkans, about the echoes of war. And of course, when it comes to the liberal intervention outcomes, I wanted to make sure, and I'm going to share it in the next slide, why mostly the Muslims in the Balkans, especially in Bosnia and Kosovo, have reacted so promptly to the war in Ukraine. And this is much related with the fact that they have experienced a post-war predicament that they can have a look and recall and reflect upon when it comes to certain discourses about how the post-war Ukraine or the post-war Middle East will look like. And this is something that even scholars have tried to explore by using the Balkans as a region where we can learn some lessons from the past. Then there is the burden of the Euro-Atlantic alliance. We know that the Western Balkans and especially are trying to get more and more involved with this Euro-Atlantic hemisphere, right? Not the European Union, but also NATO, and how sometimes I call it the burden because some of the local demands that Muslims have tried to claim on the ground, for instance, standing in solidarity with Palestinians, haven't been really listened or heard by the institutions that are supposed to, to comply with the Euro-Atlantic agenda, extremely important for the future of the region as a whole. And then, as I said again, the counter-hegemonic histories, because let's say that Ukraine, but in particular Gaza, when it comes to the Muslim population, has become already an emotion and an emotive issues among Muslims in the Balkans. And we have not only a weaponization of history, as I pointed out a couple of minutes ago, but we also have a war of memories, where, for instance, certain solidarity campaigns between Serbia and Israel, they have been enacted by looking at the Second World War, right? When the Serbs and the Jews from Serbia were fighting on the same front, let's say, while the Muslims were on the other side of history, and so on and so forth. I won't go back to that period because it will be, historically speaking, much more complicated than it is. But definitely, this war of memories is something happening across the Balkans, and of course, it fuels radicalization, first of all, but also not a radicalization in terms of new threat of terrorism and so on and so forth, but let's say a polarization of opinions based on this war of memories happening because of the geopolitical turmoil that we see around the Balkans. So when I was mentioning this, the outcome of liberal intervention and why Muslims in Bosnia and Kosovo, as you can see from these two maps, have reacted promptly to the situation in Ukraine and Gaza, it's because basically they exactly know what it means to go through a country that goes through war and then is going to be discussed on the table in diplomacy on how to reorganize the state. Here you see, like, I've chosen these two maps, one of Ukraine and the other one is of Israel and Palestine. But definitely the people in Kosovo and Bosnia know what it means to live in a country that has an interrupting sovereignty. This is how I call it. Because, of course, the Balkan Muslim majority countries continue to face an interruption of their sovereignty. I'm talking about Kosovo when it comes to the northern part of the country, and even a much more complicated context, Bosnia, after the Dayton Agreement. And many scholars have tried to explain why solidarity campaigns for Palestinians, for instance, or for Ukrainians have come from the Balkans. In a very simple words, because these countries in the Balkans, they know what it means to reconstruct the national sovereignty and the national statehood after a period of war, where you have, let's say, the return of the empires or a very colonial violence happening and rehappening again, where you cannot basically claim your right of self-determination, for instance. And I'm going to touch upon this issue very, very quickly in a couple of minutes. But also, it's a matter of how the people in Bosnia and Kosovo have been complaining against the outcome of this Western liberal intervention in the Balkans. So there have been many parallels between understanding the Dayton Agreement that divided, as you can see from the map, Bosnia-Herzegovina in three different federal entities, right? The Serbian, the Bosniak, and the Croatian, to be seen in comparison with the Oslo agreement between Israel and Palestine. And somehow over here, I'm not going into details, but many see the same intervention, the post-war intervention, seeking peace, but at the end of the day, not being able to create a better situation than it was before. Or let's say that we have many continuities between the period of war and the pre-war period and the post-war period. So let's say that when we also we look at a potential scenario that many Western scholars have indicated for Ukraine, where we have already the occupied regions of Ukraine, and also this part of Ukraine, the western part, which is going to be administrated by like British and French forces or the Western alliance. This really resonates deeply among Muslims, and I will say also Balkan people, especially in former Yugoslavia. And hopefully the situation in Ukraine and in Palestine and Israel won't look like the situation is described in these two maps, but this is, in my opinion, one of the reasons for which many solidarity campaigns have been enacted by Muslims in the Balkans when it comes to the war in Ukraine and Palestine and Israel. Also, another issue has been the fact that the war in Ukraine and Palestine has also highlighted and exposed cleavages when it comes to certain issues of statehood and the self-determination. Most of the time when we have seen solidarity campaigns enacted by Muslims in Bosnia, for instance, and here the first photo is a photo of Ali Izetbegovic, the first president of independent Bosnia, who was accused of being a Muslim radical, even an Islamist, for his background, and I'm going to talk about it in a few seconds. Most of the people have been also put in alert with the potential transnational wave of radicalization that from the Middle East can hit the Balkans. Also, when it comes to the war in Ukraine, the spillover effect has been an issue discussed among scholars, among also local policymakers. But here I would like to say that even if the concept of self-determination and statehood that has been put at stake in Ukraine and in the Palestinian territories by Russia and Israel, respectively, at the same time resonate in Bosnia and Kosovo once again, and also in other countries where the Muslims are just a minority, such as Montenegro, in the so-called Sanjak region in the Western Balkans, across Bosnia, Montenegro, Serbia, and partially Kosovo. But definitely the Balkans have also very good experiences and good memories. You know, what I called at the very beginning, these counter-hegemonic memories that we can find in the Balkans. And in this regard, you know, I've used this photo, which is a photo of like a shared space in Kosovo, where you see clearly like a church and a mosque sharing the same backyard, and even some shops in between, to say that sometimes this culturalist approach to war and to identities such as Islam or Muslims in the Balkans, they have produced more problems than issues that I would like to resolve by looking at the cultural atmosphere or the religious identity of Muslims in connection with the Ummah, or also with other cases such as Ukraine that resonate deeply with the context of the state where Muslims live, the Balkans in particular. When it comes to also to certain solidarities, and here I focus more on Bosnia, I've chosen these two photos, once again, focusing on Ali Izetbegovic, the first president of Bosnia and Herzegovina, when in 1983 he was brought to the dock. It was still Yugoslavia. For those who are not really familiar with the figure of Ali Izetbegovic, he was, Muslim activist, also considered to be a philosopher of European Islam. Let's not discuss how problematic this could be, this kind of definition, but he was considered to be the leader also of an organization founded by him and other Muslim intellectuals and activists that you can see in this photo, surrounded by policemen, of the young Muslims in Yugoslavia. They were brought to the dock because the organization was engaged with not only with other with Muslim scholarship, let's say, but also with the decolonial efforts of countries where Muslims were trying to seek their own self-determination. So these Muslims, even though they were within Yugoslavia, and even though Yugoslavia back then got a non-aligned position, these Muslims didn't not only criticize Yugoslavia for its non-aligned position, but they wanted, as Muslims, they wanted to have their own position towards the world, especially looking at the global south. No, so like Algeria, sometimes India, Palestine, and indeed here you have a photo of Yasser Arafat, the historical leader of the OLP, together meeting with Ali Izetbegovic. And perhaps in this picture we can talk more about politics than a religious aspect. But let's say that this kind of connection between the Muslims in the Balkans and the global south, especially during already the 80s, after the Sarajevo process in 1983, was used by Serbian nationalists and also other nationalisms like the Croatian ones to describe the Muslims in the Balkans as a threat for the region, and also as the people who wanted to bring the Balkans back to the Ottoman time that in the eyes of nationalists all the time look like going back to the Oriental past. Of course, a past that neither Serbs nor Croatians nor other form of Slavic nationalists they wanted to deal with anymore. So Ali Izetbegovic and other Muslim activists and intellectuals, they were accused of not only being Muslims, but also for, let's say, getting engaged in this new form of pan-Islamism. And the situation, once the war in Bosnia started, it got even worse, because we know that we have many connections between so-called, mujahideen who wanted to help the brothers of the Muslim brothers in Bosnia against the nationalists. But, from historical sources, we know that there was not much, interaction between these mujahideen and the Muslims in Bosnia, because let's say that they disagreed on many things, even though they were both Muslims and they were supposed to fight for the same cause. So from Bosnia and for the protection of the Muslim people in Bosnia proper. the problem of self-determination, and here I move a bit south into Kosovo, and when in Kosovo there has been a circuit, a web of memories that have facilitated these solidarity campaigns for people in Gaza. Let's say that the discussion has been all the time around the issue of the politics of self-determination. In some Albania media outlets, there have been also some scholars who have tried to compare the resistance of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank with the resistance of Albanians in Kosovo during the 90s against the Milosevic regime. And of course, the discussion was about trying to compare it, to not compare it, to find commonalities for supporting such comparison, or let's say to find differences that could deny such comparison. So they were, of course, once again, most state authorities in Kosovo who really didn't want to get engaged with this kind of historical reckoning when it came to understanding the resistance of Palestinians, like the resistance of Albanians during the Milosevic oppression. But still, I think that also in Kosovo we had different stories and counter-hegemonic narratives that have been extremely important. And here I would like to talk more about the feminist protest that have been enacted also by Muslim women in Kosovo, with regard not only to Ukraine and Ukrainians, because of course the echoes of war are still very present in today's Kosovo because of the situation of the country and the issues with Serbia in the northern part of Kosovo, but also when it comes to Palestine. And I've chosen a picture of a woman in Tirana standing and making this comparison, like Netanyahu is equal to Milosevic. And this comparison was not only didn't only inspire people and activists and women activists in the Balkans, in this particular case in Albania, but also I remember this op-ed editorial by journalists in Haaretz who said that actually the future of Netanyahu looks like the predicament of Milosevic of the 90s. But when I want to point out this politics of self-determination that could be also problematic, because it seems that the political demands of the historical politics of self-determination do not really comply with the democratic discussion or with bringing democracy, which was something that, for instance, Albanians in Kosovo wanted to. We also have a different perspective of this kind of feminist approach that is embedded in the resistance of Kosovo Albanians during the 90s. And this is two pictures that I think they speak that by themselves. And this is like how women in Kosovo wanted a peaceful divorce. And they wanted to get rid of the Milosevic regime. So it seems that today's solidarity campaigns for Palestinians and Ukrainians are not only important to revitalize the political atmosphere and the grassroots activism in the Balkans, but they also recon with the past. And somehow the legacies of the 90s are still back, not only in terms of traumatic memories or memories of war, but also in a more positive and a more pragmatic way when it comes, for instance, to claim the right of self-determination. From a different perspective, let's say it could be the feminist perspective and the perspective of peaceful divorce. However, all these kind of campaigns have always, and I think that regardless of the country we are from or the media outlets that we may read on a daily basis, I think that in the Balkans, it was extremely fascinating to me to see how these solidarity campaigns, or more properly, the echoes of war from Ukraine and Palestine have created a kind of geopolitical paradox in the region. Because in the case of Ukraine, for instance, the long contested Serbian authorities in Serbia and in Republika Srpska, which is the federal entity in Bosnia and Herzegovina, they of course have taken so far, at least rhetorically, a pro-Russian position, which has been quite problematic. But the way the Serbian authorities have stood for Israel, it aligns them with the so-called Euro-Atlantic discourse towards Israel's right of defending itself and waging war against a terrorist organization like Hamas. On the other hand, exactly the same two wars in Ukraine and in Gaza in particular, they have, of course, brought many people, Muslims in particular, when it comes to Gaza, to take to the streets and to demonstrate in solidarity with Ukrainians and especially Palestinians. But these kind of postulates of solidarity with Palestinians have created a kind of dilemma for these countries. So countries such as Kosovo and Bosnia that have been supported by the West, now they do not really share the Western rhetoric over the Middle East. And this could have been a problem when it comes to the grassroots voices and also the institutional discourse that in these countries can clash one another and can not entirely hijack the democratization or the reconciliation on the ground, but for sure they create some frictions that can lead to something more complicated. And here I would like to talk more about the situation in Kosovo that, unlike Bosnia, it's very instructive to understand this geopolitical paradox or perhaps the double standards. For those who are not familiar with Kosovo politics, right now, over the last couple of years, Kosovo has been ruled by a political party, Vetëvendosje, which, in English, we can translate as self-determination, that had a history of solidarity campaigns for Palestinians, because somehow Albanians in Kosovo, especially this organization, looked at the Palestinian issue, at the Palestinian question, as something they know already, because there were lots of parallels between the situation of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank with the situation of Albanians in Kosovo during the Yugoslavian time. So somehow, let's say that this Palestinian question has always been very important for the political party. But once the political party came to power, this kind of rhetoric was almost erased from the political history of the political party. So there was a kind of silence that I want to also to discuss in different ways in a couple of seconds. But Kosovo somehow, when it entered with this new leadership, the situation where the country had to normalize its relations with Serbia, and it was during the first administration by Trump. All the potential solidarity campaigns in Palestine, but also with the global South, somehow disappeared, creating distrust towards the political party, especially among the youth in Kosovo. So not only among the Muslim population, but especially, let's say, with in this case. So somehow, and here I've chosen these two photos. On the right side, you have an agreement that was signed up in 2020 between Kosovo and Israel, where the recognition of Israel of Kosovo was extremely important. Because it was a part of a larger agreement, also with Serbia and Kosovo. I don't go here into details, but we can discuss more perhaps during the Q&A session, where basically the Kosovo was presented actually by Trump. This is the tweet from the 4th of September 2020 as the first Muslim majority country in Europe recognizing Israel. So if we take the cultural and the religious aspect of it, this is, of course, was presented as a very big thing. But after that post by the tweet, actually, by Trump, we were still in the Twitter area, Kosovo authorities immediately reacted by saying that Kosovo is a secular state and cannot be described as a Muslim majority country, even though de facto it is. So this kind of what I called at the very beginning of this presentation as the burden of Euro-Atlantic alliance when it comes to Kosovo, I mean that most of the solidarity campaigns that were enacted by Muslims, they have been kind of erased because of the fact that the country has to to comply with the Euro-Atlantic agenda, which is not bad in itself, but it can create problems when it comes to certain demands, certain critical voices, mushrooming from the grassroots level, and also trying to have their own political legitimacy in a time where this political legitimacy is not really appreciated by the state authorities, in turn creating problems between the political elites in Kosovo and peoples in the country. And this is exactly the case I'm talking about when it comes to the issue of Vetvendosia, and why, for instance, this the Palestinian archive. This is like a very good piece, an excellent piece, I would say, written by Vjosa Musliu and Piro Regepi about how the political party of Vetvendosia in Kosovo completely erased from the website of the political party all possible messages of solidarity for Palestinians, because of course Kosovo was not supposed to ally with a non-Western entity or a non-Western issue or a non-Western how can I say claim for self-determination in the case of Palestinians. So this was extremely important, because some also this kind of silence that was created in Kosovo motivated many people to look back at the past, at the history. Here you have a piece of the newspaper where somehow, especially Muslims from Albania, Kosovo, and Palestine, they actually have a very long history of solidarity and of connection with one another, and also interconnection on a religious basis, right? They may meet each other when they go to the Mecca for the Hajj, or they may end up praying in the same mosque in the West, right? Because the Palestinian diaspora and the Albanian diaspora is kind of a big thing in the Western countries. So this kind of silence that Kosovo authorities and also Bosnian authorities to a certain extent have maintained over the situation in Gaza has been really bothering Muslims in both countries, but in the Balkans in general. Of course, for other reasons in Montenegro or in Bulgaria, and I'm going to that in a couple of minutes. But still, the echoes of the war here do not really resonate only with regard to Ukraine or with the Middle East right now, but also with the echoes of war of the 90s. And Slavenka Drakulic, who was the Croatian Hannah Arendt, was the journalist who followed all possible trials at the International Court for the Crimes of Former Yugoslavia in the Hague, said it out loud that in the Balkans after the war, silence in the face of justice is a form of complicity. So also this archive of memories from intellectuals, let's say, in a time of turmoil such as the period of history that we are witnessing, let's say, it speaks volume to the Balkans, and especially to those people who were, let's say, hit the hardest by the war and the genocidal violence during the 90s, namely the Muslims. In Bulgaria, and I move a bit the geographical attention to another part of the country, so I move out from the former Yugoslavian space to talk also about another form of silence, perhaps more opportunistic, how I define it, when it comes to the Muslim community in Bulgaria. The Muslim community in Bulgaria is very well known. I mean, many are interested about the Turkish and the Muslim community in Bulgaria because of the Ottoman past. Bulgaria is an instructive country when it comes to look at the history of the post-Ottoman predicament and so on and so forth. But the Muslim community, most of the time, they are not really visible in the political landscape. Or if they are visible, it's because there is all the time a sort of political vernacularism that describes the Muslims as the community that stokes ethnic rivalry, not perhaps in Sofia or in the central and the big areas of the country, but perhaps in the southern part, bordering with Turkey and Greece, and let's say the rural part of the areas of the country where mostly are inhabited by the Muslim and the Turkish population. So here on the first photo on the left, you can see, the Bulgarian Mufti, so the leader, let's say, of the Muslim community in the country, together with Pevsky, is the guy with the red tie, who is an oligarch, actually, a very well-known oligarch, who, even though he doesn't have much connection with the Turkish and the Muslim community, he's making inroads right now into the de facto Turkish political party, which is the Movements for the Rights and Freedoms in Bulgaria, that hasn't said much about the situation in Palestine. And it hasn't said much because, let's say that this political party has a very long history of corruption, of dealing with corrupted cases as an agent of corruption, let's say. But also the silence of the Muslim community here in the Balkans, it's very much telling, because also Muslims were persecuted just a couple of years before the end of communism in '89. If you would like to go back at that to that period of history, so the '80s, the Muslim population was targeted by the socialist regime in a process which was called the revival process, where Muslims were supposed to change their names. In the very end, in the summer time of 1989, so a couple of months before the end of the communist period in Bulgaria and in Central Eastern Europe, Muslims were kicked out of the country, a phenomenon that was described by the communist authorities as the great excursion, like explaining that they were tourists and not escapees, but tourists going to Turkey, enjoying Turkey and the seaside during the summertime. But in 2012, the Bulgarian parliament recognized that experience of the Great Excursion as an ethnic cleansing. And indeed, scholars, especially historians, have recollected the past, and they have recollected the experience of the Muslims and the suffering of the Muslims during the 80s, but also during the 60s, let's say, going back in time, as an ethnic cleansing, an act of ethnic cleansing. And when it comes to today's situation, not only in Ukraine, but particularly in Gaza, someone is really puzzled by this kind of silence that could be opportunistic because, let's say, the political party representing the minority groups, namely the Turkish and the Muslim population at large, let's say, has different interests. But the more interesting things is that the only political party that is standing in solidarity with the Muslim cause is basically the far-right political party, Revival, or Возрождение in Bulgarian, who is not only an Islamophobic political party, but is also a far-right party, and it's a party which is also, full of Russophilia inside. So this is in the first photo, you see I think is the Palestinian ambassador of the Palestinian embassy to Bulgaria, and the leader of this political party, this far-right political party, Kostadin Kostadinov, who are basically sharing the same place where they took to the street in order to demonstrate their willingness to speak about peace and to speak about the recognition of the Palestinian state. So here in the Balkans, perhaps outside the circle of the Muslim population, you see how not only Ukraine, but also Palestine and the issue of Palestine has become a commodity in the Balkans, not only exploited or let's say in a negative terms, but also used by Muslims to speak about the long legacies of injustice and lack of recognition of statehood or the right of self-determination, but also by the far-right political parties such as Возрождение for basically counting their chickens, simply like this. I think that I have spoken so far for more than 30 minutes. So Tim, I would like to stop here, and if we have questions or comments, I will be very happy to answer them.
Thank you so much for that. That was not only informative, but it was fascinating and interesting. And I think so often those of us who study history, we're looking at some point in time in the past and looking at it as sort of these obscure or isolated events. It's fascinating to look at history in this way, where we're looking at historical events from 30 years ago, but suddenly they have relevance today because of current geopolitical conditions. So this was a great presentation. I'm going to open the floor in just a moment to questions. If anyone has a question, they will raise their hand and I will unmute them. But if I may, I would just like to start with a question of my own. And did I hear you correctly? You said that when Ukraine was first invaded by Russia, that there were Muslims in the Western Balkans whose families in Europe said to pack your things and get ready to leave. So this wasn't just seeing what happened with the Ukrainian invasion or Gaza. It wasn't just sort of a reliving a trauma or reopening a post-traumatic stress disorder. This was, they feared, possibly Republika Srpska taking over all of Bosnia and Herzegovina, or Serbia reabsorbing Kosovo. Was that an actual fear?
Yes, as you said, first of all, we are dealing with a trauma land, so still the trauma is there, and especially those people who went through experience of ethnic cleansing and genocide, as it was recognized in the case of Srebrenica, when they started to see that Russia was invading Ukraine, and when they knew that Russia had and still has lots of connection with the Republika Srpska in Bosnia or with the Serbian authority in Serbia proper, they were afraid that, of the spillover effect. They were sure that the war was about to hit them once again because the geopolitical circumstances were so favorable for the Serbs to take the revenge or to take over again the place and the region that they wanted for so many years. And because of the war in Yugoslavia and the Dayton Agreement, they didn't manage to fulfill that will, that desire, let's say. And also, I will say more in a historical and cultural terms. I always I immediately understood that fear when people were talking to me, because in my opinion, there is not really a difference between the Russian word and the so-called Ruski Mir and what Russia has been trying to present as a kind of legitimate claim over neighboring countries, right, where there are Russian-speaking population and so on and so forth, with the concept of the Srpski Sveti, like the Serbian word. It's the same kind of concept that has been circulating. That's why during the presentation, I talked about the return of empires, the return of this kind of, big empires attempting to take over again based on linguistic or cultural issues that hasn't been, let's say, fixed in simple words in a multicultural and a multi-religious environment such as Bosnia and Kosovo. So these are the two reasons. First of all, the traumas still circulating among Muslims and Balkan people because of the war.
There
in
he's
the
back.
And second of all, because of this return of great politics and empires.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So I'm going to open the floor to questions. If someone has a question, you can just raise your hand and I can unmute you, and you will be able to speak and ask Dr. Trupia a question. So I will watch for hands to go up to see if there are any questions. And while I wait to see if there are questions, if you don't mind, I would like to ask maybe another question. You mentioned the dilemma among the Serbs. Uh, I believe you said in Serbia, maybe at least with the government or with some people, was a support for Israel, because I guess maybe it was seen that Israel was fighting this Muslim enemy. But it seems strange also to me in some ways that Israel is annexing land in the West Bank, and that was what was done to Serbia in essence, or some would say with Kosovo. Maybe a Serb would see Kosovo being taken from them. So it's interesting with Serbia's view of Israel's action in Gaza.
Thank you for the question. This is very fascinating, and I have written about it, this historical connection between Serbian nationalism and Zionism, for instance. And sometimes we try to look at them with two completely different clusters of forms of nationalisms. Actually, the Balkans, especially Serbia, has been the region where Zionism was supported. Especially the first Yugoslavian kingdom was extremely supportive of Zionist circles from Serbia, going to Palestine to create Israel as a state. And not only this, during the Balkan War, the first Balkan War, so the Balkan would-be nations against the Ottoman empires. In this war, many Balkan Jews participating in the war along with Serbs or Bulgarians. And Zionist Jews learned how to fight an empire and how basically to learn how to fight an empire and to establish their own state in a country or in a region which was going to be liberated by a former colonial enemy. So somehow that you have lots of mutuality between the issue of self-determination of the Balkan nations and then the Zionist circles coming from the Balkans and going to Palestine, who ended up fighting the British mandate in Palestine in an attempt to establish their own state. So it's very complicated from a historical point of view. It goes along, decades of contested history. But when I was making this kind of parallel between, the Serbs and the support with Israel, well, first of all, it's connected with the fact that Islamophobia is a thing in Serbia, right? Especially because they connected with the issue of Kosovo. So of course they stand for Israel, but also because let's say that the fear of this kind of spillover effect and that Muslims in the Balkans can create and dismantle more and more the Serbian state, or the Serbs, the Republika Srpska in Bosnia, and so on and so forth. They has been always a matter of fear and weaponization of history. I think we have a questions.
Yes, in the chat session, for those who maybe can't see the chat, I will read it. The question is ask, how would you assess the position of the Muslims living in Albania in connection to the wars in Ukraine and Palestine?
It's a tremendous question, because also Albania now is a new country where, for instance, Islam was not really part of the national discourse due to the communism, right? I mean, during communism, religion was completely obliterated from the country. But now we see that more and more Albanians are re-exploring certain legacies of the past regarding Islam and the Ottoman times and so on and so forth. From what I see, and how do I assess it? From what I see, many young Albanians, especially in the diaspora, like Albanian diaspora from Albania, they are really taking a position for Palestine, because they see in retrospect many legacies and commonalities between them, Albanians, and the Albanian nationalism and the right of self-determination in the Balkans, which that goes even beyond the borders of Albania. So it goes into Kosovo and sometimes in North Macedonia in a very nationalist way, and the right of self-determination of Palestinians. So there is a new generation of Muslims in Albania who is very openly and very critically standing for Palestinians in Gaza. And in this regard, they didn't really take the same position in the case of Ukraine. Perhaps the state authorities, the president of the country, they've always said that they supported Ukraine against Russia because they have to comply with the Western discourse. And we know that also the position of the country of Albania is extremely problematic right now, because it's in between, staying in the Balkans and joining the European Union. So everything that can happen in the country and can bother, let's say, the Western authorities or the Euro-Atlantic authorities could be problematic for the future of Albania, for the future predicament of the country. But still, from this point of view, I see, and perhaps I was not expecting that level of engagement with Palestine, but there is still, as we speak, a very a very large movement of young Albanians, Muslims and non-Muslims, who are speaking up in solidarity with Gazans in particular.
Thank you for that answer, and thank you for the question. Again, there's two ways you can either raise your hand, or if you prefer to put one in the chat, like the previous question. While we wait to see if there's another, if you don't mind, I would just like to ask you one more question about, you mentioned at some point during your presentation about liberal intervention outcomes, and they did little to uproot the previous system of oppression and injustice. I'm thinking about I, I guess the NATO intervention in Bosnia and in Kosovo, and even to this day, maybe I don't know offhand, Kosovo isn't recognized as a state by many countries in the world. I believe that's correct. So uh, I was just wondering how the Muslims see this sort of, because I know when I visited Bosnia, and I've heard the same thing about Albania, they had a very favorable view of Americans, which surprised me. And they went back to Bill Clinton because they said uh, uh, when the United Nations did nothing, President Clinton, and NATO stepped in and did something. So it seemed like there was sort of this recognition of this Western interventionism. But now, 30 years on, I was wondering what the feelings are there. Do they feel like it's sort of frozen in time? Kosovo's not recognized by everyone yet, and you still have the division, the Dayton Accord still in place in Bosnia. So I was wondering what the feelings are about this previous system of oppression and injustice has not been uprooted.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question. Once again, this is a great question. Perhaps we don't have the time to explore all possible perspectives, but let's say that I would like to begin with saying that we cannot generalize. Of course, you can find people who have a sympathetic approach towards the US, others who are more critical within, beyond the Muslim community, in and beyond Bosnia and Kosovo, Albania, and so on and so forth. In my opinion, I will say that actually Kosovo is on an international level, is very well recognized by many states, and also important ones. I mean, we do have respect for other smaller countries in the global south, but if we look, for instance, the European Union, we have 5 Kosovo non-recognizers, which are Spain, Slovakia, Greece, Cyprus, and Romania. But at the same time, you have Italy, Germany, France, the US, and the UK that recognize Kosovo. The problem of recognition of Kosovo, perhaps this is out of today's discussion, but just to clarify, it's more related with the war, right? So Russia and China do not recognize Kosovo. Russia, because they still complain about the Western liberal intervention, right? Something very similar that we are witnessing right now in the Middle East, and the Russian complainings, while they have been used, actually, the case of Kosovo to intervene in Crimea and in Ukraine, right? I mean, Putin's discussion is like, if they did it in Kosovo, why I cannot do it in Ukraine? Of course, this is an exploitation of history because the context is completely different. But when it comes to this kind of sympathetic approach towards US, and what I mean with saying that, after the war, the Western liberal intervention didn't create the standards of living that the intervention promised at the very beginning. This is, let's say, a new generation of people who have come to terms with the fact that the post-war predicament has been extremely painful for them, and that somehow, especially in Kosovo still, or in Bosnia, the ceasefire agreement, such as the Dayton agreement, they turned out to be very painful when it comes to the establishment of institutions that can function. So most of the time, the Dayton Agreement is used in Bosnia to create or to stop parliamentarian work, or the recognition of the country, or the country recognizing other countries having a political agenda or international affairs. So for instance, But even though we have talked about many solidarity campaigns for Palestine in Bosnia, Bosnia couldn't recognize the state of Palestine because Republika Srpska has always vetoed this kind of recognition. And this is, of course, a legacy of the past. When it comes to Kosovo, still the northern part of Kosovo, is where most Serbs live. It doesn't allow the Kosovo authorities to extend their own sovereignty also in that region, because that region borders with Serbia, and Serbia is still interfering in a way that Kosovo cannot expand this kind of national sovereignty and to seek a full-fledged recognition of international state. So let's say that also many critical scholars have complained about the consequences. This is a much more complicated discussion that has to deal perhaps with a certain conditionality politics that has been used in Bosnia and in Kosovo, not only with the NATO alliance, but also and especially with the European Union accession process. And perhaps this is more political than historical, but people, I fear that people started to understand that this kind of endless transition towards a full-fledged democracy, a full-fledged recognition of their own state, is not happening because of the legacies of the Western liberal intervention. That, of course, as I pointed out in the presentation, perhaps I didn't stress it enough, it's very difficult to imagine a better world without that kind of intervention in the Western Balkans and in Yugoslavia. But still, there are people who criticize and who comment in a critical way, which doesn't mean rejecting the role of the Euro-Atlantic forces, but putting them in a more critical context where the demands of people are, let's say, a bit different from the demands of the burden, converted commas, of the Euro-Atlantic alliance.
Thank you. So that was excellent answer. I appreciate it. So I do not see any other hands up or any other questions. We've gone 1 hour now, so I guess we can wrap things up. Dr. Trupia, did you have any final comments or thoughts you wanted to add?
No, I would like to thank you, actually, Timothy, for organizing this webinar, and also the Balkan History Association for letting us speak about this very timely issue, in my opinion, and for the other attendees, so also for the people who will be watching this seminar. I think it will be online. I'm going to share my my Gmail, like my email. So if someone would like to drop me a line, please free to do it. And if you have other questions, I will be very happy to answer them. So thank you so much again, Timothy.
Thank you so much. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Mihai Dragnia for sponsoring this, the Balkan History Association. And it's my understanding he will be looking at other webinars coming forward in the future with other topics. So watch your Balkan History Association emails or your Facebook page for the Balkan History Association, and hopefully there'll be some more interesting webinars coming forth in the future. Thank you again, Dr. Trupia. That was informative and very, very interesting at the same time. And thanks to the attendees who came out to watch today's presentation. And hopefully we will see you at another webinar in the near future. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.